Hello everyone, this is part 5 of What If Naruto Wants to Surpass the 9 Tails, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Naruto was tired. Not so much tired in body, but just tired of dealing with all the thoughts going through his head. The only stroke of luck was that the debriefing was postponed to tomorrow due to a council meeting. After the long trip back, he came straight home, intending to go to sleep even though it wasn't anywhere close to being his usual bedtime. Usually he would have paid a visit to Ayami, but he was just too tired of everything to do it now. He'd go visit her tomorrow. Welcome home, Naruto. He had certainly not expected to see Zannah when he arrived. Don't get him wrong, he was always happy to see her, especially as it had been a while since she had come around, but he didn't feel like he was in any shape to be having a decent conversation with her. The demoness was sometimes refreshingly blunt and straightforward, but she could also be maddeningly inscrutable and difficult to figure out. He was really not in the mood to play mind games with her. He was still not really over the whole incident with Tsunami and had been hoping that he would have some time for it all to settle before Zannah came around. She was dressed in her usual red silk yukata that exposed her dusky legs and cleavage, giving tempting glimpses of what was hidden beneath. The whole thing was even more tempting because he knew that she never wore any underwear beneath it. "Hi Zannah, have you been waiting for me?" Naruto asked curiously, as this was the first time that she had greeted him after a mission. "You could say that, come with me." The demoness beckoned him, which made him curious. She was acting rather oddly. She led him towards the table in the living room where he usually ate whenever he bothered to cook something for himself. On that table sat a large bowl of ramen, very good ramen if the smell wafting from it was any indication. He didn't eat the stuff often, as it was quite unhealthy, but it was his favorite food, stemming from the fact that the dish was connected to the first act of human kindness he could remember in his life. He looked at the red-haired demoness in shock. "Did you make me ramen?" There was a vast amount of incredulity in his tone. She had never done anything of the sort before. Aside from the kindness she had shown him during his childhood, she had at most given him only some advice or hints as to how he could do something himself. "Yes, it was the least I could do, considering the fact that I led you into a situation that had you falling in love and then being forced to make a choice. But I didn't." "How did?" Naruto was unable to even finish a sentence in his shock, not knowing whether he should deny falling in love or ask how she knew about it. There is no point in trying to deny it, especially to yourself. You did fall in love with that Tsunami woman in the short time that you knew her. Zannah cut him off. "As for how I knew, well, just because I am out of that seal, doesn't mean that we are not still connected by it. The will of the death god is not going to be undone by the decision of a mortal." She said this while tapping his stomach, causing the seal to appear again after years of being invisible. "How are we still connected by the seal?" Naruto asked curiously, setting aside the more discomforting issues for now. "While I was still your prisoner, you had many privileges over me. One of these being the ability to read my thoughts, had you known how to do it. Now that the seal is open, that link goes both ways, though of the two of us, I am the only one who knows how to use it," she explained to him, with just a faint hint of smug pride in her voice, while Naruto just looked at her in shock, having never imagined that she could just read his mind at will. "You needn't look so shocked, I don't often make use of it." Naruto was somewhat reassured by this, though still severely off-kilter at learning that the woman he wanted to marry could read his mind. Most people would call him completely insane for that alone. "So you know everything that went on in Wave. I could sense that you were in some distress, so I checked and found out that you had developed feelings for another woman while on that mission. I did not care to look at anything else." She did not seem angry, but Naruto knew better than to take that at face value. Human women were unpredictable enough about these things, the demoness before him was another matter entirely. "So, are you angry at me for letting that happen?" Naruto asked with only a small amount of hesitation. As far as he was concerned, it was better to just get it out in the open and deal with the consequences. "Don't be an idiot. I was the one who arranged for it to happen after all, now sit down and eat your ramen," she said with only mild irritation in her voice. She could see that he was obviously not operating at full capacity, or else he never would have forgotten the fact that she had already told him that. The blonde sat at the table in a daze. All the revelations that he had just heard on top of his already tired mind was not leaving him particularly clear-headed. So he just did as he was told and went to eat his ramen. It was really good ramen, the best he'd ever had actually. This is amazing, I didn't know you could cook. Naruto complimented and fished for information simultaneously. You'd be surprised at all the things you learn to do just for the sake of doing something when you're immortal. There was a dry amusement in her voice, implied that cooking was hardly the only thing which she had taken up out of boredom. He finished the ramen and was about to ask another question about arranging the incident with Tsunami. He had figured as much himself that night after verbally ripping Inari a new asshole, but it was always good to get some details. His question, however, never left his mouth as she grabbed his hand and led him into the bathroom. The bathtub was full of water and obviously prepared for him. In short order, they were both naked and lounging in the hot water, with Naruto unable to hold back a happy groan as he felt the relaxing embrace of the water. Zannah settled onto him, using him as a backrest, and he eagerly wrapped his arms around her. Moments like these were precious, and the combination of hot water and having her so close was leaving him extraordinarily mellow. So you knew what was going to happen in Wave? Naruto asked finally. No, but I knew something like that was bound to happen eventually. You may not have noticed it, but in your pursuit of me you have developed a strength of both body and character that many women will find attractive. It was inevitable that eventually you would come across a woman that you could spend the rest of your mortal life with, if you allowed yourself to. Zannah explained. So you told me to continue sleeping with other women to make sure it happened as soon as possible. Naruto concluded. Exactly, I must say I am rather impressed that you figured that out. The demoness complimented. She very much wanted him to stay hers, but it was best to get this kind of thing out of the way as soon as possible. She would have been quite upset with him if he decided that she wasn't worth the effort, but not surprised. But what was the purpose of it all? Why even engineer that situation when I would never have abandoned you for another woman? Naruto couldn't prevent himself from being at least somewhat upset by her actions. His heart protested the decision to leave Tsunami despite it being the only thing he could have done. It would have protested abandoning Zannah even more. Emotions were such messy things. If possible, his feelings would have urged him to keep them both, no matter how impossible that was. Zannah just gave a sigh at having to explain this. It's not that she didn't understand his confusion really, she was just not fond of being questioned and explaining herself. You saw how easily you developed feelings for that woman and felt the temptation to stay with her. You have no idea what an oddity you are. You were presented with two roads in life at that point and you chose the harder one knowingly, perhaps an impossible one. That is simply not normal for humans, or anyone for that matter. Just about everyone will always choose the path of least resistance, and yet you chose the harshest of roads for a tiny chance at achieving something that you promised as a 10-year-old instead of the easy path that would have made you happy right away. Naruto was quiet for several moments as he digested that. If he understood correctly, then Zannah had more or less expected him to give up on his desire to marry her once he realized how hard it would be. When that hadn't happened, she had engineered a situation where he would be presented with an alternative choice, an easier choice. When he had turned away from that as well, she had apparently been quite surprised despite showing only minimal signs of it. What she had done today, making him ramen and this extraordinarily relaxing bath, was her way of apologizing for causing him heartache. She wasn't sorry for doing it, but she did apparently feel at least a bit bad about hurting him with it. There are rocks on every road, it's all just a matter of kicking them aside. He answered her softly, but firmly. The road you've chosen has mountains on it, Naruto. Was her dry response to his moment of philosophy. A mountain is just a big rock anyway. If I can't kick it aside, I'll climb over it. Naruto retorted, now smiling. What a monstrous will you have. If you're not careful you may end up becoming Hokage by accident. Zannah teased, but was genuinely impressed by his determination. It wasn't every day that you encountered someone so incredibly stubborn. And end up like that old buzzard doing paperwork behind his desk all day. No thanks, though I wonder why he doesn't just use shadow clones to do his paperwork. Naruto retorted. Not to mention I would probably murder the council in a fit of rage when they eventually annoyed me enough. So you've never considered becoming Hokage? The demoness asked in genuine curiosity. They had never spoken of it, but she thought that he would have at least considered it. I've considered it once or twice, but I've set my sights much higher than that, and even if I hadn't, I'm more of a fighter than a leader. Naruto answered. Besides, I'm not really loyal to the village, the only loyalty I have is for you and Naomi. The village is just a convenient place to grow stronger until I find a way to reach your level. My, how very devious of you. She purred. It's pretty hard to be loyal to a village that did its best to kill me when I was a child. You were the only reason I survived. He responded warmly, his heart rate jumping at the purr in her voice. As soon as he was done speaking, he leaned close to her and gave her earlobe a lick, which made her turn around and kiss him, which swiftly turned into a battle of tongues. Zannah decided to cheat and poked him in the side, making him twitch as he was somewhat ticklish there. Once Naruto was distracted by the poke, he swiftly lost, and the demoness wasted no time in pushing her tongue into his mouth, running it over the sharp teeth that she had given him without fear of injury. Naruto once more lamented that Zannah had created a human body for herself that wasn't ticklish. Their kiss ended soon after and they got out of the cooling water. After they dried up, Zannah led Naruto to his bed, knowing that he was still tired and that some sleep would leave him feeling much better. As Naruto settled into bed with Zannah laying her head on his chest, he thought about everything that had happened recently. The whole thing with Tsunami had left his heart somewhat mauled, but if given the choice he would go through it again. He felt that Zannah was now more certain of his conviction, and that was something that he needed if he wanted to win her over. Power alone wouldn't be enough, at least not as far as he was concerned. He also needed to impress her as a person if she was ever going to love him the way that he loved her. Zannah was awoken by the feel of lips kissing her neck and smiled slightly, but pretended that she was still sleeping. They were currently both lying on their side, with Naruto spooning her. It was still very early in the morning, before dawn even, and she had no intention of getting up yet. A large hand gently grasped her breast and began to knead it, making her give an appreciative hum at the attention. Her nether lips moistened as she felt his already hard member press against her posterior. A choked-off scream escaped her throat when he suddenly pushed her onto her stomach and thrust inside of her. She grinned to herself, that had been unexpected. He had never been so forceful with her before and she liked it. He lifted her up onto her knees and continued pushing himself inside her from behind with slow, deep thrusts. Her enjoyment of the steady pace was interrupted when he lifted her backwards so that she was sitting in his lap with her legs spread widely, still impaled on his member. She would have protested the new position as it didn't allow him to penetrate as deeply as before, but his voice in her ear interrupted her. This is a new idea I've wanted to try for a while now, let's see how you like it. His voice was a deep, lusty growl that left her eager to see what he had come up with. His unpredictable nature all but assured her that it was going to be interesting. His left had moved to her breast and his right went between her legs. At first nothing special appeared to be happening, before the demoness suddenly felt a constant and powerful stimulation being focused on the cluster of sensitive nerves just above her opening, with the same thing happening to her left breast soon after. She was quickly left panting as he began to thrust inside of her again, all the while keeping up whatever he was doing with his chakra to create this kind of stimulation. Her legs began to draw together automatically in response to the pleasure, but he surprised her again when he created chains to hold her legs open. In normal circumstances she could have broken the chains, but he had strengthened them considerably since he first managed to create the chains, and she was in no position to bring her full strength to bear on them. Her hands went to her breasts and helped stimulate them. She was panting rapidly and her skin gleamed with sweat as she shuddered with anticipation of her coming orgasm. Just as she was achingly close, however, he suddenly stopped and left her trying to catch her breath at the very edge of an orgasm. Don't you dare, stop. She managed to pant out in a growl, angry that she had been denied her climax at the very end. His left hand moved over to her right breast in response and resumed stimulating it, his right hand doing the same to her clitoris. Before long she was back to panting, but this time the build-up of pressure was slower, as Naruto apparently figured out how to regulate his chakra just right to draw things out. When she finally reached her orgasm, the sound that escaped her throat was something between a scream and an inhuman roar. Nothing else existed except for the pleasure surging through her body, especially as he hadn't stopped manipulating her most sensitive pleasure zone with his chakra, prolonging her orgasm. Her legs would have clamped together instinctively, but the chains kept them spread wide. When she came back to her senses, she realized several things. She was on her knees again, unchained, with Naruto still very hard inside of her, and her release had been explosive enough that both she and Naruto were soaked in the juices she had released, not to mention the bed. She also became aware of the fact that she didn't feel the liquid warmth inside of her that would indicate that he had climaxed with her. The few men and women that she had deigned to sleep with before had been nothing but playthings used to scratch and itch, and doing a poor job of it too. Naruto, however, had somehow learned to play her body like an instrument, had made her scream out her pleasure and surrender control to him completely, which had never happened before in her life. When she had told him to learn about sex and practice, she'd never imagined that he would be capable of something like this. She was still panting when he started thrusting inside of her again, making her give out low moans as her hypersensitive entrance was penetrated again. Then he did something that made her eyes fly wide open in shock. Naruto had seen that they were both covered in her glistening release, which included the small ring of her anal entrance. He didn't have much experience with anal sex, his size usually preventing such a thing, due to the pain it would cause. The only one who had wanted to try anal sex with him had been the S&M-oriented Keiko, but according to what he had been told, there were strong erogenous zones inside the anus. Seeing as it was already lubricated, Naruto pushed his middle finger inside, knowing that trying to penetrate her back door with his dick would be a bad idea. What the hell? Are you doing? Zannah demanded, still panting heavily. She'd never done something like that before, and she hadn't expected Naruto to do it either. Instead of answering, the blonde began thrust harder and move his finger inside of her anus, looking for any sensitive nerve bundles. When he found something that he thought might be his target, he began pressing his finger against it, swirling his chakra around it chaotically. A feeling of immense pleasure slammed into her, and she wasn't even aware that her screams were slightly demonic and were scaring the early rises outside of Naruto's apartment. Her second orgasm hit her with the force of a sledgehammer, and this time she clearly felt Naruto shooting thick ropes of his seed inside of her barren womb, making her climax all the more intense. She felt his finger being withdrawn and he collapsed on top of her, his teeth sinking lightly into the flesh between her neck and shoulder, making her shiver at the sensation. Both were panting heavily and ready to take a short nap as their bodies relaxed. They were slick with sweat, dripping from her explosive first orgasm and absolutely reeking of sex, but the only thing they could be bothered to do was move to the other side of the bed, which was at least somewhat cleaner. Naruto made sure not to pull out of her, as they both liked to stay that way after they had sex. He couldn't help but let a proud and self-satisfied grin split his face as he spooned up to her, gently nibbling at her skin with his teeth. Zannah simply lay there, legs still giving the occasional shudder, and enjoyed the aftermath as her body cooled down and her lover teased her skin with soft bites. So explain to me again why you'd want me to do this with other women? Naruto asked lazily. He had been trying to find a way to ask this question for a while now, and right now she seemed as mellow as she would ever be. To be blunt, because I consider the rest of you humans as barely above something to play with, and it makes a good learning experience for you. She retorted, completely lacking any empathy for any human aside from him. That's really harsh, Naruto answered with a sweet drop. I will be very upset with you, however, if you decide that you would prefer a mortal woman after the decision you made to leave the one in Wave. As far as I am concerned, you burned all your bridges with that decision. The demoness said pleasantly, but the menace was clear in her voice. Naruto was not overly bothered by her tone, it was hardly the first time she'd used it on him after all. You say that, but you still want me to sleep with other women. You never know when I might get bored and decide to add someone new to play with. Naruto needed a few moments to process that sentence before he could respond. Looks to me like I was perfectly capable of satisfying you just now. He retorted with some smug pride coloring his voice, punctuating his statement by thrusting inside of her with his once again hard member. He had just pushed fully inside of her when her inner walls unexpectedly clamped down on him so tightly that he honestly didn't think he could pull out if he wanted to. A blazing heat suddenly enveloped him and she began moving her pelvis just slightly, but it seemed as if her insides were squeezing and stroking him all by themselves. It was the most maddeningly wonderful sensation that he had ever felt, and it left him groaning in pleasure, unable to even think about how in the hell she was doing this. Just when he thought that it couldn't possibly get any better, or perhaps worse, her hand went down to his testicle sack and started to gently fondle it. Immediately he felt the same burning sensation there that he was feeling on his rod and felt the pressure of a coming orgasm, but unlike before it was so intense that it actually hurt. In no time at all he was releasing inside of her again, but in volumes that he'd never imagined were even possible. She was still clenched around him just as tightly as before and forcefully draining every last drop out of him. When it was over, Naruto was left a gasping mess, struggling to even stay conscious. You aren't the only one who knows a few tricks. The red-haired demoness purred. What was that? Naruto managed to gasp out. Just a little something I learned to do. Zannah answered haughtily. You should be proud of yourself, the last man I used that on died. What a way to go. The blonde murmured sleepily and quickly lost his battle against unconsciousness, making the demoness grin. It had been a very long time since she had been able to enjoy her life like this. Despite knowing Naruto for all of his life, he had still surprised her a lot when he had decided to walk away from a woman that he could have been happy with, a woman that would have asked nothing of him. In all of her centuries-long existence she had never encountered a man that was so single-mindedly focused on something quite like this. Oh, there had certainly been people with an obsessive fixation on something, but these were usually madmen with a lust for power. Naruto cared for power only as a means to an end. It was rather odd to see actually. Someone so determined to become the most powerful man to have ever lived, and yet there was not a hint of the corruption that such power usually brings, because he was doing it to win her over. If she had told him that she would only marry him if he turned a mountain to rubble with a toothpick, then she knew that he'd go do that with the same intensity as he trained. It was quite flattering to have such devotion focused on her, and she couldn't deny that she found his intensity and forcible attractive. Despite her initial reluctance to get attached to a mortal, he was wearing down her resistance with the same bull-headed determination that had driven him for many years now. She didn't expect him to ever live up to his promise though. Humans simply weren't capable of reaching her level of power, not in any way that she could think of, and thought of it she had. But that was all right, she wasn't going to marry him, as her pride would not allow her to marry someone who was not her equal, but she would enjoy the fire that burned in his soul just for her. She had been furious beyond all reason when the Yondaime had first sealed her and would have taken out her anger on Naruto had they met when she was in such a state. Fortunately, the years between her sealing and meeting Naruto for the first time had dulled that anger considerably. He had been such a cute little thing when he had first blundered into the seal, blue eyes wide and curious. With her anger cooled, she had been unable to muster any hostility towards the tiny golden-haired child that was staring at her with completely innocent blue eyes. When she had first started to comfort him when his sleep was plagued by nightmares, she hadn't expected that he would latch onto her quite so tightly, but in hindsight, it should have been obvious. She had been the only good thing in his life and therefore immediately became the most important thing in his life. Naruto had turned out to be a bright spark in an existence that had become grey and dreary long ago. If she was capable of such a thing, then she would have been sorely tempted to make him immortal just so that she could keep him around longer, though the more she thought of it the more distasteful the idea was. She knew that an eternal life would change him, there was no way that it wouldn't. It would be worse to see him lose that energy that he now had than to see him die with it still burning in him. Death she could accept eventually, she had no choice in the matter, but to see him become jaded and listless would darken his memory, and the memory of him was all that she would have once he died. Zannah pushed the thoughts out of her mind and just focused on enjoying the moment. That was the key to making immortality bearable after all, to shut out thoughts of both the past and the future and simply live in the present as much as possible. There was no point in thinking about it in any case, since there was no way to make a human immortal that she knew of anyway. Well, it appears that Team 7 has had a most interesting first C-rank mission. Sarutobi commented mildly after hearing the full mission report. Considering everything you've told me, I have no choice but to classify this as an A-rank mission. Sasuke and Sakura looked smug and excited respectively, while Naruto and Kakashi looked as if they didn't care, which was fitting as they really didn't. I am giving Team 7 a week away from duty, but before you go, I need Naruto to explain one other thing to me. Everyone looked at the aged leader curiously, wondering just what exactly he could want explained, considering the fact that they had already told him everything and wondering why Naruto in particular. Earlier this morning several civilians reported that they heard what sounded like the tortured screams of a woman coming from your apartment, Naruto. Sarutobi said, with a clear demand for an explanation. Kakashi automatically smiled at hearing this, while his younger two students looked both resigned and annoyed. Well, you see, Hokage-sama, I had a new technique that I needed to test out, so I chained the woman in question to my bed and began to apply it. She seems to have found the technique to be quite powerful and began screaming like a demon almost as soon as I started using it on her. Naruto explained with a completely straight face, struggling mightily to suppress his laughter. Kakashi began snickering at the explanation, and at the Sandaim's horrified look. He knew that Naruto would never touch an unwilling woman and was being deliberately misleading with the way he'd explained. Idiot, don't say it like that. It's bad enough that you've slept with the client on nearly every mission we've ever had. I don't want people thinking that my teammate is a rapist too. Sakura shrieked hysterically. Stop screwing around and just tell the truth, Naruto. Sasuke ground out through clenched teeth, an eyebrow twitching madly. Everything I've said is true. Naruto insisted. Naruto, are you telling me that you've raped a woman just this morning and then used her as a target to test a new ninjutsu? The Sandaim's horrified whisper floated through the air. Sarutobi felt like he was having a heart attack and felt his world crumble. He had tried for years to befriend Naruto and failed. If the boy had turned out to be a monster that would abuse women like that, he would never forgive himself. Minato had been one of the kindest and most gentle men he had ever known, at least outside of a mission, and to have the man's son become an abomination like Orochimaru would be too much to bear. I don't recall mentioning anything about rape or ninjutsu. Naruto deadpanned. Sarutobi sighed as he realized what exactly had just happened. Someone had obviously heard Naruto engaging in some very loud sex and reported it, and now the blonde had used the situation to screw with him. He hadn't even been aware that Naruto was sexually active. As he calmed down a bit, Sarutobi cottoned onto something that Sakura said, which he had overlooked before. What do you mean Naruto has slept with nearly every client? Kakashi couldn't help but give a perverted giggle at the memory of his student's experience with D ranks. The Junin had no doubt that Naruto was the only genin who had ever enjoyed his D ranks. Well, Hokage-sama, apparently Naruto is rather popular among the ladies. Kakashi explained with much amusement in his voice. But they're not supposed to do that, the ninja corps is not an escort service. Sarutobi protested weakly, suddenly realizing why Naruto had been the only one to receive such praise on his missions, not to mention the sometimes strange wording of it. I assure you, Hokage-sama, they had other duties for my cute students. Kakashi assured his leader. That's not really the point. Sarutobi replied with a sweet drop beading on his forehead. Don't worry about it, Hokage-sama, it was all for the best. After all, if not for that, I may have lost control of my beastly urges and kidnapped a woman off the street. Naruto said blandly. Sarutobi winced at the words, knowing that they were a rebuke for jumping to conclusions about Naruto being a rapist earlier. He sighed heavily and dismissed the team. Not long after, Sasuke and Sakura had gone their separate ways after Sasuke had once again refused her invitation for a date. Kakashi was also just about to head home when Naruto spoke to him. I need your help on a few things, Kakashi-sensei. What kind of things? Well, I need you to point me at someone that I could spar with on a regular basis, and I also need to talk to a genjutsu specialist. Naruto explained. The sparring partner I understand, and I even have someone in mind, but why the genjutsu specialist? I thought you couldn't use genjutsu. Kakashi asked curiously. Well, aside from learning how to get out of genjutsu, it's also because of something to do with my fuinjutsu research. Kakashi raised an eyebrow in interest at hearing that, but decided not to pry. His own knowledge of fuinjutsu was rather haphazard, but he knew that the art required the user to know all sorts of things about chakra. Well, if you want a sparring partner, then you'll want to find Team Guy, the Junin sensei. Maito Guy is a taijutsu specialist and so is one of his students. He actually has the opposite problem of you, as he doesn't produce enough chakra to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. As for a genjutsu specialist, you'll want to talk to the Junin sensei of Team 8, Yuhi Kurenai. Kakashi advised. That's perfect, thanks Kakashi sensei. I wonder if he'll end up sleeping with Kurenai too. Kakashi wondered with a perverted giggle once Naruto left. Asuma would probably be pissed about that. Several days later, Naruto was approaching the training ground of Team 8, who had just arrived home from a mission 2 days ago. Since Team 7 had come back to the village, Naruto had been working on several projects, such as his wind and water training. He had discovered that training his water affinity was going better than wind, which was fine with him as he was more interested in water anyway. Wind was fairly one-dimensional, as it was heavy on offense and had very little other uses. Water, however, was far more versatile and had all sorts of esoteric uses, not to mention that he found it easier to control water-natured chakra for some reason. His greatest interest, however, was in fuinjutsu. It was a complex and demanding art, requiring knowledge of all sorts of oddball things that most shinobi never even thought of, but in exchange for its difficulty of learning, it was also without a doubt the most powerful of the shinobi arts. A skilled fuinjutsu user could do practically anything if he knew how. He had hit a roadblock when he hadn't been able to find enough information on yin and yang natured chakra. He knew that chakra was a mixture of physical and spiritual energy, but yin and yang release were highly specialized and refined versions of this concept. He was actually gambling on the idea that a genjutsu specialist would have some information on yin release at least. He had already met with the eccentric Junin sensei Maito Guy and arranged for frequent sparring matches with the equally eccentric Rock Lee. It had been surprisingly easy to get him to agree to it. The two of them were always glad to help a fellow Leaf Shinobi, and once they heard of his troubles with ninjutsu, they had started shouting about how youthful he was for working hard to overcome his weakness and enthusiastically invited him to join them in the daily exercises. They were weird and creepy as hell with their eyebrows, spandex, bowl cuts and sunset genjutsu, but he could definitely respect the determination. They had been confused when he told them that he had an alternative to training weights, but hadn't made a fuss over it. The only real downside to them was their teammate Hyuga Neji. The guy was an asshole of the highest order, always making remarks about losers sticking together and claiming that fate would not let them excel as shinobi. Naruto made a note to beat the crap out of that guy one day. He had vaguely known Lee, Tenten and Neji from the previous year of the academy, but he didn't recall Neji being that irritating. Kurenai was definitely a beautiful and exotic woman, with her red eyes and untamed black hair. Her strange bandage dress was also quite an interesting outfit. The Junin in question noticed his approach and was puzzled. She knew that he was Kakashi's student, making her wonder why he was approaching their team. Her genin had also noticed him and had various reactions to the tall blonde's presence. Hinata was blushing madly because he was effectively topless, covered only by the long black coat which he kept open at all times. She wished that she could be as bold as him, but she was too embarrassed to even take off her oversized coat because of her developing breasts. Shino had no obvious reaction, but his insects were reacting excitedly at the approach of Naruto's powerful chakra. Shino had never been quite sure what to make of his former classmate. The chakra that his Kikaichu could sense was absolutely gigantic, and yet he was supposed to be the dead last. Kiba didn't really know what to think of Naruto. On the one hand he was the dead last, but on the other Akamaru was telling him that the blonde was dangerous. He didn't really think that Naruto was all that dangerous, but he did remember that the blonde never lost a spar in the academy. Yuhi-san, you have been pointed out to me as a genjutsu specialist. There is something I need to discuss with you. Naruto stated once he was close enough. He could be polite and use honorifics when he needed to, though it irritated him. Forgive me if I'm wrong, Uzumaki-san, but you don't seem like a genjutsu user. Kurenai returned. She knew perfectly well that he had far too much chakra and too little control for genjutsu. I'm not, but I still need the help of someone with a strong grasp of the art. How about we discuss this over lunch? Naruto offered. Kurenai raised an eyebrow at the lunch invitation, ignoring the surprise on the faces of her genin. She'd heard some rumors about this student of Kakashi. She found it hard to believe the rumors that said he'd slept with half the women in the village, but she still found that lunch invitation suspicious. There was no denying that he was attractive, but she had no intention of being any man's latest conquest. I'm afraid I can't accept your invitation, Uzumaki-san. My team and I already have plans to go for lunch. They are welcome to join us if they wish. What I wish to discuss with you is nothing secret. I will pay for all of them. Kurenai let a small confused frown surface on her face. If he was freely inviting her genin to join him for lunch, then he was almost certainly not attempting to get into her panties. Could he actually want to discuss genjutsu? She looked towards her students, clearly questioning whether they wanted to accept the invitation or not. Free lunch is always good, Kiba said with a grin. I have no objection, Shino said stoically. Hinata just nodded, still embarrassed. Naruto led them towards Ichiraku's, which had over the years expanded to serve more than just ramen. Chuki had taken all of their orders already and they were now waiting for their food to arrive. So, Uzumaki-san, you said you wanted to discuss something about genjutsu. Kurenai began. Just Naruto please, and yes, I had several things I wanted to discuss with you. Naruto answered. Alright then Naruto, what was it that you couldn't ask Kakashi, since I know that he is proficient with genjutsu? Kakashi knows how to use genjutsu, yes, but I needed someone with a much better grasp of it. I'm studying fuinjutsu, you see, and I'm making an educated guess that a genjutsu specialist could help me with a problem I'm having. Aside from that, I would also like to learn how to get out of genjutsu from you. Naruto explained. Kurenai was very surprised to hear this. Fuinjutsu uses were extremely rare. She only knew a few fuinjutsu techniques and had struggled hard to learn them. What are you working on that you would need a genjutsu specialist to help you? Kurenai asked, intrigued. I've recently been researching the specifics of yin and yang chakra, but I've hit a bit of a roadblock in regards to that. I'm working under the assumption that genjutsu uses mostly the spiritual aspect of chakra, am I right about that? Naruto explained. Yes, genjutsu uses very little of the physical component of chakra. Kurenai answered. I must say that I am very surprised you even know about yin and yang chakra, very few Junin even know about that. Fuinjutsu makes you learn all sorts of strange things, Naruto said as an explanation. Well anyway, I've been attempting to create a seal that would allow me to store some yin chakra. Since the yin aspect is form without substance, I am assuming that genjutsu powered by yin chakra alone would be at their most powerful. Eventually I hope to create a method to harness the refined yin and yang chakras instead of the watered down versions that most shinobi use today. Kurenai was now seriously impressed. That was the kind of thing that made shinobi legendary, though it sounded like a difficult undertaking. You intend to attempt using purified yin chakra to power genjutsu, like the Nadai Mizukage was rumored to be able to? She asked. I didn't know that bit about the Nadai Mizukage, but no, I'm afraid that I'm not much of a genjutsu user, though I am interested in seeing the effect of yin chakra genjutsu. I'm theorizing that the physical component present in the genjutsu that shinobi use is making it easier to dispel the genjutsu. You've definitely caught my interest, but if you're not attempting to use yin release genjutsu, then what are you doing this for? Kurenai said curiously. I'm interested in seeing what I can do with the refined yin and yang chakra. I'm fairly sure that the yang chakra won't allow anything more than body enhancement since it is substance without form, but I may be able to craft a seal to use them in some unorthodox ways, perhaps even a combination of the two. Kurenai just stared at him for a long moment, deep in contemplation before answering. That sounds incredibly interesting, but I'm afraid I don't know how to use pure yin chakra. I've been trying to figure it out for a long while now, but I've had no success so far, so I'm not sure how much help I'd be. I didn't expect you to know how to use it, but I'm hoping that with your genjutsu expertise, I could make a breakthrough in my fuinjutsu research, and who knows, we might figure out a way to harness yin chakra while we're at it. Aside from that, I'd still need you to teach me how to break out of genjutsu. So what do you say, Kurenai-sensei? Naruto asked, referring to her as sensei with a smirk. He knew that she was very interested in this and would probably be unable to resist. Kurenai thought it over for another long moment, but she knew that she was going to accept. She had been trying to figure out how to use yin release for a few years now, and then a fresh genin comes along with a proposal to use his skill with fuinjutsu to try and figure out the problem. Even if he was a fresh genin, he spoke about the subject with enough familiarity that she had to take him seriously, and even neophyte fuinjutsu users weren't to be underestimated. Alright Naruto, I accept. Hinata, Kiba and Shino had been silently observing this entire conversation with a great deal of surprise. Their supposedly dead last former classmate had just now been engaged in a debate about some very high-level chakra theory that they had never even heard of. It was at this point that Ayami came out of the back with the food they ordered. Kiba immediately forgot about the discussion he had just overheard and stared at the beautiful waitress. Hey baby, where have you been all my life? He said to her while checking her over. Ayami only raised an eyebrow at the much younger boy trying to be smooth. He was hardly the only one to try a lame pick-up line, and definitely not the best. Kurenai meanwhile was severely irritated with her student. He'd been showing all the signs of a budding lecher, and all of her attempts to prevent him from becoming the next Jiraiya had failed so far. Stop sniffing around my sister Kiba, Naruto demanded. Your sister? came a chorus of confused and questioning voices. Not by blood, but he's thought of me as a big sister for many years now. Ayami explained with a smile. Aside from Zannah, Ayami was the only who knew pretty much everything about him. She even knew about Zannah and what he was trying to achieve. That she hadn't tried to convince him out of it or judged him for it, had made her all the more precious to him, and he definitely wasn't going to tolerate some mutt try and get into her pants. Well, even if she is your sister, it's up to her to decide if she wants to have an animalistic experience. Kiba retorted with a cocky smirk once the surprise died down. I'll be sure to tell you that when I go after your sister and maybe your mother too. Naruto retorted, making Kurenai choke on her food, and Hinata began to give off red light. Even Shino was blushing, though it was almost unnoticeably, maybe even both at the same time. This last bit made Hinata go nuclear, and even Kurenai was blushing. While Kiba was spluttering in shock, Naruto looked at Hinata and just couldn't restrain himself from commenting. If you blush any harder, Hinata, people are going to mistake you for a lantern from the red lights district. This was too much for the girl and she passed out, forcing Shino to catch her. By this time Kiba had managed to regain his ability to talk and burst out. You stay away from my mother and sister, bastard. And what do you mean when you go after them? Well, since you're such a supporter of allowing women to choose who they want to sleep with, I figured that I should let them know that I'm available. Naruto said magnanimously. Kiba gaped at him for several long seconds before responding. Alright, I get the point. I'll stay away from yours if you stay away from mine. He grumbled. Agreed. Naruto said pleasantly. But if they come after me, then all bets are off. That'll never happen. Kiba shouted. Keep telling yourself that, Kiba, it might actually be true. Naruto paused. Then again it might not be. 2 months later. The 2 months since Naruto and Kurenai had agreed to work together had been very productive in several ways, though Naruto had gotten the most out of it by far. Kurenai had decided to teach him how to dispel genjutsu first, and as was typical for Naruto, he did nothing normally. He wasn't able to manipulate his chakra flow enough to halt it and break the genjutsu that way, and he didn't like the idea of sending out chakra pulses or stabbing himself, so he came up with his own unique way of breaking genjutsu. He had discovered the method accidentally when he had been trying to stop his chakra flow, but had condensed it instead. Turns out that if someone's chakra is dense enough, then the foreign chakra of a genjutsu wasn't able to pass through his coils and do its job. Kurenai had been both shocked and irritated when they discovered that this made him effectively immune to regular genjutsu, at least as long as he kept his chakra condensed. They hadn't managed to figure out the yin release, and Naruto had theorized that his fuinjutsu knowledge wasn't good enough. He had managed to convince Kurenai to bring him all the fuinjutsu books and scrolls from the Chunin and Junin sections of the library, despite the fact that she shouldn't have done that. The red-eyed Junin had loaned him the books under the condition that he was to only look them over and see if anything in there could help them in their research. Naruto had agreed, but as soon as he got home, he had created a small army of clones to copy everything that she had brought him as soon as possible. He now had a small army of clones constantly working on assimilating all the knowledge that had suddenly become available to him. The things that he had seen in those books were simply far too interesting to let go. What had him the most fascinated by far was instructions for how to inscribe small fuinjutsu formulas with just his chakra and sometimes a small amount of blood. For larger seal arrays, he needed to prepare them in advance, and then he could slap them onto the ground where they would expand, and then they could be controlled by use of a master seal that he inscribed on his body. It irritated him immensely to go on missions now, as it was taking time away from his training and fuinjutsu study. Merely days ago, he had finally cracked the secret of how to manipulate gravity with fuinjutsu. He needed to inscribe an area with a sealing array, after which he would be capable of adjusting the gravity within that area. The potential for training in a higher gravity environment had left him salivating, but he had no chance to make use of it yet. He had even found a way around his problem with ninjutsu. Naruto was now capable of inscribing a sealing array that would mold the chakra for whichever ninjutsu he wished, as if he were making hand seals, as long as he knew it well enough. Unlike hand seals though, he didn't need to worry about control, as the sealing array did it for him. All he needed to do was channel chakra into it and the technique would form. This was certainly interesting, but he had long since lost interest in regular ninjutsu. He hadn't stopped working on elemental manipulation either, and he was now greatly intrigued by the possible applications of water-natured chakra. He determined that the flowing nature of water, combined with his highly dense chakra, allowed him a degree of control over water that mere hand seals didn't allow. He still didn't have any techniques, but he was working on a few things that held a lot of promise if he could get them to work. All of this work and the near-constant stream of memories from his shadow clones had unfortunately left him operating under a constant mid-level headache. Naruto was sure that if it wasn't for his healing factor, his brain would start leaking out of his ears. This had been confirmed when he had knocked himself out once during a D rank mission and his team had been forced to carry him to the hospital. When he'd woken up, he heard terms such as neural bruising and brain damage being tossed around, which had convinced him to tone it down just a little. Another thing that had changed were the D ranks. The Sandaime had apparently had a stern talk with potential clients about using his shinobi as an escort service, which meant that Naruto was no longer able to screw with the minds of his teammates in that way. The damage had been done, however, and Team 7 now had a rather questionable reputation. Naruto and Kakashi were perfectly fine with it, Sakura and Sasuke, however, were not. The Pinkett couldn't even walk down the street without wanting to sink into the ground when the villagers leveled disapproving looks her way. On the other end of the spectrum, Sasuke was getting lots of approval from his fangirls, who had gotten 10 times more rabid, leaving the Uchiha survivor at his wits' end at the creepy stalker tendencies they were now exhibiting. Currently, however, Naruto was not suffering any headaches or driving his teammates insane. At this moment he was engaged in a spar against Kurenai. The two of them had been working on their project for some time and Naruto felt that some progress at least had been made, but they were both tired of breaking their brains over it and wanted to relax a bit. Naruto had suggested a spar and Kurenai had been curious as to how good Naruto really was. Her curiosity also stemmed from the fact that both of their teams had been nominated for the upcoming Chunin exams and she wanted to see how he measured up compared to her own genin. She had come to regret agreeing to this spar, as she had discovered several truths that were making things very difficult for her. She wasn't able to use genjutsu against the blonde due to the fact that he was condensing his chakra, which meant that she had to rely on taijutsu and ninjutsu, both of which were most definitely not her strong points. Naruto was stronger than her, faster than her, and his body was so densely muscled that even her chakra-enhanced blows were not having any great effect. She on the other hand had to be extremely careful to never even directly block one of his hits, as the shattered log that she had used for a substitution testified. The only thing even keeping her in the fight was her greater experience, flexibility and the few kaiten ninjutsu that she knew, while Naruto was limited to taijutsu and shadow clones. She knew, however, that if the blonde managed to get her into a grapple that it was going to be all over for her. Kurenai was already panting and feeling the drain from using her much-neglected ninjutsu, while Naruto had a wide and excited fanged grin on his face, not tired in the slightest. He looked a bit singed from a close call with a fireball not long back, but she could see the burn healing even now, leaving him in perfect health. He had discarded his coat and was facing her barekisted, which was somewhat distracting. Naruto could have ended the fight long ago if he had used his chains, but he was still trying to keep that secret, even though he figured it was only a matter of time before Sakura blabbed about it. Deciding to finish it, he made several clones and then rushed at the red-eyed woman, making her wary of what he might be planning. The clones were only moderately difficult to dispatch because of their one-hit limit and soon she was left facing only one Naruto. He rushed at her and she prepared herself for another difficult taijutsu engagement, but was left shocked as he dispersed after a single hit, leaving her wide open for the original to grab from behind and wrestle her to the ground in the same hold that he had pinned Haku during the wave mission. As Kurenai had her hands pinned and the blonde firmly planted between her legs, she was left helpless. The only techniques that she could perform without hand seals were genjutsu and the 3 academy techniques, which were useless right now. The Junin was quite angry at herself for falling for that trick. Naruto had been coming at her with straightforward attacks like a juggernaut the entire time and then blindsided her with this tricky finishing move. Currently he was grinning at her widely, pleased with the fact that he had won against a Junin, even if she had been severely handicapped. "I win, Kurenai-sensei." "So you do." She grumbled slightly, her pride mauled at the fact that she had lost to a genin. Even if she had lost, however, she couldn't deny that the current position was rather enjoyable. She had developed an undeniable attraction towards the blonde. She had gotten to know him over the 2 months that they had worked together and she was very impressed with the kind of man that he had turned out to be, despite the rumors about him. She had even made her romantic interest in him clear, but he had told her that he wasn't interested in starting a serious relationship, which was what she wanted. They'd talked it over and Kurenai had been mildly surprised to hear that there was some truth to the rumors about him sleeping with numerous women, if not exactly half the village. The surprise had been because he hadn't acted in a perverted manner with her in the slightest, aside from a few offhand compliments about her beauty, which was what made her think that the rumors were entirely made up due to him being the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Kurenai hadn't wanted it to be just sex, so she had backed off, but her attraction hadn't diminished in the slightest. The red-eyed Junin couldn't blame him for not wanting to get into a serious relationship at his age, but it was still frustrating her to no end. He was the most interesting and impressive man out of a rather limited selection of them, even if he was 10 years younger than her and he wasn't willing to engage in anything more than casual sex. She couldn't even get angry at him since he had openly stated everything instead of perving on her. Maybe we'd better get up, I think we're giving your genin a show. Naruto told her with a smirk. What? Kurenai yelped and turned her head to see that her 3 students were indeed looking at their compromising position with incredulous blushes. The 3 of them had just arrived for the scheduled training session to find the 2 of them sparring and had been shocked to see Naruto winning. They didn't understand why their sensei wasn't using any genjutsu, but it was still shocking to see a genin winning against a Junin. Even more shocking had been to see the blonde tackle their sensei into a rather intimate position and then have a short conversation with her like that as if it was no big deal. They quickly got on their feet, Kurenai blushing heavily at being seen like that and Naruto just smirking, not embarrassed in the slightest. Well, Kurenai-sensei, we'll continue our research after the Chunin exams, I hope to see your team participating. After saying that, Naruto left, leaving Kurenai alone to explain her embarrassing position to her students. OMAKE, the reason that Kakashi nominated his students for the Chunin exam. Team 7 was waiting for Teacher perpetually tardy sensei to arrive on their training ground. Naruto was nursing a splitting headache caused by too many close dispersals, which had flooded his poor abused brain with complex fuinjutsu arrays and formulas. The fact that he hadn't even gone to sleep last night was not helping his headache. In spite of this, however, he was excitedly scrawling seals on a large scroll. The reason he hadn't gone to sleep was because of the seal he was currently inscribing. If his research was correct, then this seal would allow him to view an alternate dimension by increasing the gravity in a small area to truly ludicrous levels and pouring a large chunk of his chakra into the seal to power it. The destabilizing effect of such a powerful gravitational force should allow him to open a rip in space-time for a few seconds before the chakra powering the seal ran out. There were several other minor arrays included that would cause further destabilization and guarantee some kind of effect. Sasuke and Sakura were deeply freaked out by the crazed expression on the face of their teammate as he scribbled on his scroll and therefore unwilling to ask what the hell was wrong with him. Yo! Kakashi greeted as he suddenly appeared. You. Relate. Sakura gave her customary shriek. Sorry, I couldn't find any clean socks to wear. Kakashi told her with an eye smile. You. Not wearing any socks. You never wear socks. Exactly. Ignoring his sputtering pink-haired genin in favor of looking at the somewhat unstable-looking blonde. Naruto, put that scroll away, we've got some training to do. I'm almost done, sensei, I've got to finish this. Kakashi looked at his student with a resigned sigh. He knew that look. It was the same look that Kushina and sometimes even Minato-sensei wore. That look meant that Naruto wasn't going to be able to think of anything except that seal until he finished it, and he was going to ignore everything until he was done with it. Make no mistake, Kakashi was proud of his student for many reasons, but he was just as brilliant as his parents and 3 times as crazy. Alright Naruto, I guess we can wait for a little while for you to finish. Naruto rapidly finished inscribing the seal, before making a clone that held well over half of his chakra and having it take the scroll a safe distance away for, just in case, purposes. The clone was looking rightfully nervous, as many clones had met the doom because of experimental seals. Everyone was tense as they observed the clone pouring its chakra into the seal. They began to see the space around the scroll warping chaotically. Before anyone could comment or attempt to approach, the warping suddenly exploded into a twisting nether of color, some of which existed and many of which didn't. The clone was seized by tentacles that wreathed in ways that hurt their eyes to look at. A gaping maw open with countless rows of teeth and multiple tongues that sprouted yet more mouths and drew the utterly terrified-looking clone inside. Brusli Fungalrukikor Wulgrothabnith G Sintuchar. The voice crawled through the empty training field like maggots through a corpse, and it felt as if the very air was howling in pain from hearing the words which required a trans-dimensional tongue and multiple separate voice boxes to pronounce. The clone popped when it heard the voice, and the rip in space-time slammed shut, cutting off a tentacle, which rapidly dissolved into nothing. Kakashi looked at his 3 students, sporting the same empty and horrified look in his eye as they were. All of them had blood steadily dripping from their ears, eyes and nose, and their minds were already hard at work repressing all memory of the event. I shouldn't do that again. Naruto spoke, already rationalizing that it had all been a product of his overworked and sleep-deprived brain. I was hoping that I wouldn't need to tell you not to try any reality-breaking fuinjutsu as long as you're still my genin Naruto, but I guess I really should have. Kakashi spoke with a hollow voice to his similarly traumatized students. I'm nominating you for the Chunin exams and you had better get promoted. I'm not going to take responsibility if you sink the world into some extra-dimensional abyss. Sensei, what are we going to tell the Hokage about this? Sakura asked, her voice shaking and her eyes moving from side to side in wide-eyed horror. Nothing of any interest happened here, Sakura. We were all feeling a bit under the weather and decided to cancel training for today. Kakashi spoke, still with the same absolutely hollow tone. But Sensei. The Pinkett tried to protest. Nothing happened, Sakura. Kakashi insisted, voice still hollow. Why yes, Sensei, you're right, of course, nothing happened. Sakura agreed with a hesitant smile. Of course their sensei was right, silly her, being worried over nothing. It was just a normal day after all. It was too bad about the cancelled training, but other than that it was a perfectly normal, sunny day. And maybe we could all go get something to eat together, you know, as a team. Sasuke suggested, looking as if his eyes were about to roll up into his head. He suddenly didn't want to be alone. It's a perfectly ordinary day, with absolutely nothing special about it. It's too bad that Sasuke-kun doesn't want to get anything to eat, but that's alright, because it's perfectly ordinary. Sakura insisted to herself and walked off. The others left soon after, the memories buried under a mountain of instinctive mental blocks that the entire Yamanaka clan wouldn't be able to break through. All that remained was Naruto's intense reluctance to experiment with dimension-destabilizing fuinjutsu, Sasuke and Sakura's sudden terror of anything with tentacles, and Kakashi's intense desire to nominate his team for the Chunin exams. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.